All right, guys, I'm really excited to share with you today my new design tool for knitters. It's a design your own knit blanket tool. And basically, it makes designing and writing your own knit blanket patterns super simple. No complicated math. You literally decide on a stitch pattern, knit a gauge swatch with your border, plug in some information on this really cool spreadsheet I made, including some information on your yardage, and it spits out cast on stitches, final blanket measurements. It spits out your final yardage and the number of skeins that you will need for a custom blanket size of your choice if you want, or it pre-fills all that information for all of these different standard blanket sizes. So for a large baby blanket, a small baby blanket, a queen throw, a king throw, a standard king size blanket, you name it, I've got all of the blanket sizes in there for you. And it basically just automatically calculates all that information for you. I've got a Canva template for you to write your own pattern. I've got the pattern that I wrote for this blanket for you. I've got this spreadsheet tool for you guys in Excel, in Numbers, in Google Sheets. And I also have another version that has my information filled in. So you can see how I took the spreadsheet and wrote the pattern. So I've got all that information for you guys. So let's jump in. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. I'm going to show you what you get. So once you purchase the tool on Etsy, you're going to get access to a PDF. You will have that PDF either emailed to you. If you don't get the email for whatever reason, just log into your Etsy account on a browser. You can't download digital documents via the app right now. So you have to log in via a web browser to get those files, unfortunately, but hopefully you'll just get it in the email. Message me via Etsy if you have problems. Anyway, so once you get the PDF, I'm going to share my screen here and show you what the PDF looks like. Okay, so here's what the PDF looks like. You'll open it up. You'll have a link to this actual video. If you need to reference this video again, it'll pop open and you can go through this again with me. So this is like a 15-page document guidebook that has a ton of different information. I'm just going to scroll through this here. Basically, it gives you the overall steps you take, and then it breaks down each step into a ton of detail. So I'm not going to go through this entire thing for you, but it gives you suggestions on borders and how to knit the borders in, and like how to knit a gauge swatch and things to keep in mind, and exactly what each cell is on the spreadsheet. So if you need like a little bit more detail, that's noted in here. Talks about knitting your blanket. You've got the Canva blanket pattern template in here, and you've got the sample blanket pattern that I made for the staggered eyelet stitch blanket. And I've got a worksheet in here for you to take notes in. You can write out the stitch pattern repeat here if you want. I've got abbreviations that I reference, and then some other helpful knitting resources. So let's go back to the beginning. So you are going to first pick a stitch pattern. So to show you this example here, I'm picking the staggered eyelet stitch, and this is a cool, simple little stitch with some yarn overs. It creates some great texture. And this, when you select a stitch pattern, you're going to take note of the stitch multiple. What does a stitch multiple mean? I'm just going to explain it in case some of you guys don't know. A stitch multiple is the number of stitches you need to make a continuous repeat. So the stitch multiple for the staggered eyelid stitch is 4 stitches plus 2 stitches. You'll just see it references 4 plus 2. So that means you repeat a series of 4 stitches, and then you're going to add 2 edge stitches. Okay, so 4 plus 2. And then you're going to pick your border. You're going to decide whether you're going to knit your border in your blanket as you go. This is what I did in this case. I knit garter stitch in as I went here. I started with garter stitch on the bottom and I ended with garter stitch on the top. This document goes through and tells you how you can add different borders. You can knit the bottom and top in, you can add the sides on later, you can add it all in later. Here's how to add in rib stitch. Here's how to do a combo seed stitch. Those are just some examples. So after you pick your border, You are then going to knit a sample of your blanket, which is basically your gauge swatch. And the gauge swatch will also include your borders. Okay, so take your time to knit a gauge swatch. A gauge swatch is a measurement of how big your stitches are, and you really need to do this so you can use the tool accurately. So you're going to enter a certain number of stitches and rows for your gauge into the spreadsheet so it spits out accurate cast on stitches for a certain size, right? So we need to take time to make sure our gauge swatch is accurate. So for my staggered eyelet stitch blanket, I decided to knit garter stitch on the bottom and garter stitch on the sides as I went. So everything is knit in at the same time. So my stitch multiple is 4 plus 2. So I cast on a total of 14 stitches. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. So that's how many stitches I knit for my sample, my swatch. So when you are making note of your stitch count and row count for your swatches, you're literally going to measure how many stitches you have in 4 inches across or 10 centimeters across. You're going to lay this flat. I'm just holding it up so you guys can see it. So you literally count how many stitches you've got in 4 inches wide and how many rows you've got in 4 inches long. You can either use a tape measure like this, or you can use a gauge tool like this, where you lay this over and you can count stitches that way. So take note of your gauge. We are now going to move over to our worksheet here, and I'm going to show you how to open up the worksheet. Okay, I'm going to go back to my PDF here. I am going to click on this link here that says access the design your own blanket tool files. All right, so once you have this folder open, you'll see a bunch of different files. You've got a PDF, your PDF guide here. You've got the design your own knit blanket worksheet, and that says staggered eyelet here. So basically that's what I'm going to fill out for you already done, so you can see how I go from the worksheet to actually writing my pattern. I've got the design your own knit blanket worksheet in numbers for you, and I've got the Excel version here. So just note, you can click on the Excel version and download it, or you can make your own copy and use the tool in Google Sheets, or you can download the numbers file. Please know, when you open this up, you will not be able to edit this file. The first tab is the blanket size guide. I'm going to click over here. You will see this and you will not be able to edit this. Please do not click request edit access. You need to make your own copy from this file. This is the original file. So you can come over here to file and click make a copy, save as in Google Sheets, or download. And you can download it as an Excel file and use it that way and open it up that way in Excel. You can use it in Google Sheets. Whatever the case is, you either need to download this or make a copy of this. You will not be able to edit the original file, or else you won't be able to use it again later and no one else will be able to use it because it'll get all messed up. Just when you download this, save an original copy, and then when you first start editing it for a certain blanket, like save as, make new copies. So make sure you always have an original file intact so you don't need to come back in here and download a new file. You will mess up, you will delete formulas by accident. So just make sure you have easy, quick access to the original file. So you probably want to save that locally for yourself for easy access. Anyway, so let's start using the tool. So once you have it open, either in Excel, either in Numbers, or in Google Sheets, I'm just going to use Google Sheets here because it's easy. I just want to walk you through what everything is. So you've got a tab. These are the standard blanket sizes that I use that are pre-filled in both the inches and the centimeters tab. And one thing to note on the inches and centimeters tab, you can choose how you would like to start working with you can start working with inches or you can start working in centimeters. Both inches and centimeters tabs convert to the other unit of measurement. So if you're writing a pattern, you want to include both inches and centimeters or both centimeters and inches. So if you plug in information in inches, it'll automatically convert it to centimeters. Same thing. If you plug in information in centimeters, it will automatically convert to inches. The other thing to note is you see all these errors because we don't have information filled out. So don't be alarmed when you open up this file and you see these errors. There is nothing wrong with the file. We just need to fill in the information, and I didn't want to have it pre-filled because that could be confusing. So all of the cells that are orange are cells that you need to input information into. All the cells in blue are automatically calculated for you. So just keep that in mind. We just need to go and fill in all the information on these cells. So in the PDF guidebook, I go through and tell you what each cell is if you need to like visually see. And like one here coincides with one here. So I start at the beginning and talk you through what everything is, but I'm going to go through and do everything with you right now. So, okay, we're going to start with the first cell here. Enter stitches in your gauge swatch. So again, this is how many stitches you had in your swatch in your 4 inches wide. So I'm going to enter 10 because I was 10 stitches in my 4 inches. This is pre-filled to 4 inches for your gauge width and 4 inches for your gauge length. That is standard. If you are creating a stitch pattern that's a little more complicated, like sometimes with cables, you might want to have like a full cable and some edge stitches included. So you might have a gauge swatch that's 5 inches wide and 6 inches long for a full repeat. So you can modify what your gauge width and length are based on what you need to for your stitch pattern. But again, standard is 4 and 4, so I'm going to keep that in here. We're going to move down here to enter rows and gauge swatch. So this is the number of rows you have in 4 inches length. So mine, I had 14 inches in my gauge length. Now I'm going to move over here to enter yardage per skein. So I'm going to reference my skein here, and I have 223 yards for my skein. Again, the other tab you can see it defaults and you just enter the meters over there. Okay, so I have 223 yards and 1 skein. Now, you're next going to measure how long a piece of yarn you need to knit 10 stitches. So you can literally knit 10 stitches in your pattern, unravel it, and measure what that length is. So when I did that, I had 14 inches. So again, this length per stitch is automatically calculated because that's a blue cell. So now we're going to move over here to 7. Enter your stitch multiple. So like I said, my stitch multiple for staggered eyelet stitch is 4 stitches. So I'm going to enter 4 stitches, and my edge stitches, my multiple was 4 plus 2. So I'm going to enter those 2 edge stitches here. And then I'm going to enter the row repeat. So with staggered eyelet stitch, I will complete 8 rows. So you knit row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, row 6, row 7, row 8, and then you repeat row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4. That's how that stitch pattern, that particular stitch pattern is written. So I have an 8 row repeat, so I'm going to enter 8 here. You could have a 4 row repeat. You could have a 2 row repeat. You could have a 23 row repeat. They come in all different shapes and sizes. So just enter what your particular stitch multiple is, your edge stitches, and your row repeat is in this section. Then you're going to move down to the blanket border section. So you're going to then enter the width of your border at one side. So you're going to measure how wide your border is on one side. This is not the top and bottom of the blanket. This is one side. So you can measure here what one side is of your border, and mine is 1 inch, so I'm going to put 1 inch. If you don't have a border on your blanket, you can put 0. And one other thing I wanted to note before I get too much farther. So we're talking a lot about stitch patterns and stitch multiples. If you wanted to just do this with a simple garter stitch, you could enter for your stitch multiple 1, and your row edge stitches would be 0, and your row repeat would be 2. That's what you would do if you just wanted to find out how many stitches to cast on, your yardage, and your final measurements for like a garter stitch or stockinette stitch. You could do the same thing. You just the stitch multiple is 1 and your edge stitches would be 0 if you don't have any edge stitches. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so you enter your border width, which is 1 inch, then my border length. So that is the border either on the top or on the bottom. I'm assuming it's going to be the same. So I tried to make mine even. So mine again is 1 inch on the top and 1 inch on the bottom. So I'm just going to put 1 inch here. And then if my border is knit in, which it is, I knit 3 stitches at the beginning of the row for my garter stitch, and I knit 3 stitches at the end of the row for garter stitch. So 3 plus 3 is 6. So I have a total of 6 stitches. This is important to easily help you have the final cast on stitch amount. We just want to make sure that when we have the final cast on stitch amount, if we're knitting our stitches if we're knitting our border in as we go, we want the overall cast on stitches accounted for. So we need to make sure we have those border stitches. If your side border is added on later, this would be 0. That would be 0. If you are picking up stitches at the end and adding a border on the sides of your blanket, you could put in 0 there. Same thing with border length. If you are adding on, and this would need to be 0 as well if you have no border. But even if you're adding on a border at the end and knitting no border in, but you're adding it in at the end, you still need to put in the 1 inch and the 1 inch because we need to take into account the overall measurements of the blanket regardless of how it's constructed. Again, and the total border stitches of knit in the blanket needs to be accounted for so you have the appropriate cast on stitches. Okay, so this next section here, blanket cast on stitches for custom size, is the same thing as what's going on over here. So you could stop at this point and you're done. Okay, you have all the information you need to make a standard size blanket. It's done. However, if you wanted to knit a total custom size, I'm going to just pick a random size here. We're going to do 30 inches wide by 50 inches long, just so you can see how this pre-fills. So this section here is if you want to have a custom width and a custom length that's not already filled in over here. So you've got a ton of information. You don't really need all of this information to write your pattern, but I'll just go through it quickly with you just so you're aware of what it is. A lot of this information is just in here to help calculate certain numbers. But if you're curious to know what all this is, I can go ahead and tell you. So the stitch pattern width without the borders is what the width of the blanket is without the borders. So that basically is the width that the stitch multiple needs to fit in. This is the number of stitch pattern multiples I'll have. So if I have 30 inches and I have a 4-row repeat, I'm repeating that 4-row repeat 17 times, just so you know. You don't need to know that to actually write the pattern, but it's just something to note. So this is the adjusted total cast on stitches. So this is that holy grail number. I need to cast on a total of 76 stitches for my blanket that's 30 inches wide. And that includes my garter stitch border cast on stitches as well. So I know that if I want to make a blanket that's 30 inches wide in staggered eyelet stitch with this garter stitch border, I need to cast on 76 stitches. Boom, right there. And then it will give me my final blanket measurements with the border included. So my final measurements are 32.5 by 82.5. So we put in 30 by 50, and I'm just going to go down here. This is the same thing, very similar, but it just has to do with the row repeat. So this is how long the blanket is without the borders. So my row repeat needs to fit in 48 inches. I know I have a total of 168 rows. I have 21 row repeats. So I repeat rows 1 through 8, 21 times. This is the adjusted number of rows to account for the fact that I want a full repeat, rows 1 through 8. Okay, so we've got 21 row repeats. It adjusts the number of rows, total rows in the length. And then this number is a great number here, this length here. So when you're writing a pattern, you'll reference this number if you start from the bottom, knit a border, then knit your row repeats. You're going to tell people to knit to a certain length. but that length doesn't include the top border yet because you haven't knit it. So if you're knitting your border on, the top and bottom border on as you go, this will tell you to repeat the pattern until you hit 49 inches, and then you'll move into the 1 inch border at the top. So if my whole top is 50 inches, if my blanket measures 50 inches and I have a 1 inch border, I need to work till I have 49 inches. So that's a cool number. I show this in my pattern, so you'll see that in a minute. Okay, and then I have my total yardage in yards and meters and my skeins. So if I have 2.5 skeins needed, I actually need to write down that I need 3 skeins for the pattern or for myself later on. Okay, so there's all the information. Again, I just wanted to reference, I entered 30 by 50, but it will adjust based on the row repeat and the stitch pattern repeat. So my final measurements will be 32.5 inches by 50 inches, okay? So you will then have all of that same information calculated for all of these different size blankets. And these sizes are pulling from the first tab. So if you wanted to adjust any of these, if you adjust them here, they will be calculated and they will be adjusted in this tab as well. Whew. Okay, friends, so you've got this. That is all the information we need for our pattern. We've got the main things we found out were cast on stitches, final measurements, and yardage. So we got that information. I also include a link to a pattern I've written for you guys. Here's the pattern. This is the staggered eyelet blanket pattern. So basically I took the information from that spreadsheet and I created this pattern. I've got my introduction, I've got the size guide and finished measurements. So if I use the babies, the small baby, the large baby, the standard throw, the full queen throw, and the king throw. So I've got 5 sizes listed. I literally just walk over to my spreadsheet and you can see 32.5, 42, 53, 63, 74 inches wide. Those are the measurements. So if I go over here, you can see I'm going into the adjusted blanket width for the small blanket for the baby small, 32.4, 42, 53. Those are the same numbers I use here. And I just copy those down, same thing, and I included the centimeters. The same thing for length, 36.5, 59, 59. So if I go into the baby small, 36, adjusted total blanket length, 36.5. The baby large is 59.5. I included the standard throw. I didn't include the twin. I did the full or queen throw, and I did the king throw. So you could highlight the cells that you want to reference for the pattern and change those colors just so it's easy to go back and forth. So I've got that information included. So when I look at the pattern, that's the first thing I am using the spreadsheet for when I write up the pattern. I've got my yardage, approximately 404, 843, 1064. So if I go back over here, you can see my yardage down here, 404, 843, 1064, and it's also got the meters included. So I'm literally just referencing the spreadsheet to fill in this information, and I've also got it converted to meters here. Meters over here. And I have the skeins, 2, 4, 5, 8, 9 skeins of yarn needed. So if I go back over here, so I've got 1.8, which needs to be rounded up to 2 because you're not going to tell someone they need 1.8 skeins of yarn. You use full skeins. So 2, 4, 5, 8, and 9 skeins of yarn. If you want to add in 10%, you could add in 10 to 15% more if you wanted to be a little bit more generous in your yardage estimations. But again, That's how I used the spreadsheet to fill in what I need to fill in for my blanket pattern. I've got my gauge here, 10 stitches and 14 rows and 4 inches or 10 centimeters. In the staggered eyelet stitch, I write out the staggered eyelet stitch so you can use that to knit your own gauge swatch for myself, or if I'm giving this to someone else to write the pattern. I've got my abbreviations, and then I've got my instructions. I say to cast on 76, 100, 128, 152, 180. So if I jump back over here, starting with the baby small, my cast on stitches, 76, 100, 128, 152, and 180. So I just referenced my cast on stitches there. And then to go back to that number, length from cast on edge to before top border, because I'm knitting my border on as I go on the top and bottom. I cast on here for the bottom edge. I work the bottom edge. Then I begin the body of the blanket. Then I say, repeat rows 1 through 8 until work measures 35.5, 58, 58, 78.5, 78.5. That is this number. And it says ending after a row 4 or row 8. I say either a row 4 or a row 8 because it doesn't really matter when you end. It just should be on one of those rows. I don't want to make you repeat to a row 8 if you're already measuring to where you need to measure, because sometimes people's length gauge is off of is different from their width gauge. So I say repeat rows 1 through 8 until work measures 35, 58, 58. So that is this number that I reference here, length from cast on edge to before top border. So again, if you're starting at the bottom, working the bottom border, then you're working the body of the blanket until a certain length, and that is this length, because it basically subtracts the top border. So 35.5 inches, 58, 58. That's where those numbers came from, because my overall blanket length is 36.5, and I want them to work to 35.5 so they can accommodate that 1 inch border at the top. So that's what that number is. Okay. So then you tell them how to work the top border. If it's knit on as you go, tell them how to finish and end with a contact me. So if I pop back over here, so that's the sample blanket pattern that I created. If I go back to our PDF guidebook here, when I'm on step 5, knit your blanket, I have the sample blanket pattern here for you guys to download too. You can also get the template for this pattern in Canva. So you can click that. Okay, once you click the Canva link, it'll open in Canva. It'll be a copy of the original. It'll say copy of blanket pattern. It won't let you edit the original. So you could rename this into whatever you want. This is the free, Canva will open up. There's a free version of Canva that you'll be able to use. There is also a paid version of Canva. You don't need the paid version to do this, but basically you can edit this document now, and I've got everything sectioned out and tell you what to write in each section. You can also reference how I wrote and filled out the pattern that I created for my staggered eyelet blanket. So basically this just gives you all the information you need to fill out. And there you go. There is the pattern blanket, and then you can export it and make this a PDF. You can hit download and create a PDF document to download for yourself, or if you'd like to sell or share the pattern with others, there you go. So there you go. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you get the tool, enjoy the tool, design your own blankets. You know, you can get really creative with your designs. You can use a certain stitch pattern for different sections of the blanket. You could do something really cool with color if you just want to design a blanket in garter stitch, for example. Again, I showed you how to use the tool to figure out cast on stitches, finished measurements, and yardage for just a garter stitch blanket. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you use the tool a ton, and I will see you guys in my next video.